Hello and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican Book Review. Today we are talking about The Idea of the Republic by Norberto Bobbio and Maurizio Viroli together. It's a dialogue. So Norberto Bobbio is a scholar of law and political science. And of course, you know Maurizio Viroli. I did a video on him. You should know who he is. And Norberto is really old. This was written in 2001, and the translation is from 2003. In 2001, he was very old, and he was just a few years away from dying. Norberto Bobbio was, and he was involved. So he's got a very long memory, and there's a lot of talk about the history of modern Italy and how they came out of the Italian anti-fascist struggle against Mussolini. It's kind of funny. It starts off with Viroli talking about the Republic, but then Bobbio says, "Oh, there's no such thing as a republic," and so Viroli has to school him, and then he concedes, "Well, I guess there are some things that can be considered republican." So it's a very short book, 100 pages. Yeah, 100 pages. Viroli, he's very concise, except when he's talking about Machiavelli. Then he just goes on and on and on and on. They start off talking about the common good, and Viroli says that's the most important. And nationalism is the worst instinct. The Republic is the alternative to the right's cultural model. And he talks about positive liberty over negative liberty. Very, very Republican principles right there. They talk about concerns, and this is kind of the guide for the rest of the book. Money in elections, personal parties. Again, this is it's an anti-Berlusconi book. Decline of great ideologies, and absence of political leaders. It says that political parties should be a training ground for democratic and political awareness of the citizens. He talks about Mazzini'S Cosmopolitanism. And it's interesting here. He says that it's not so much a citizen of the world, but a citizen of the Republic in the best sense of the word. Talks about the cultural tradition, and then also talks about civic religion. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. Citizens must be vigilant to keep their non-dominated freedom in a republic. He defines patriotism as civic virtue. And then he goes into these old Roman words. They're Latin words, but taken from the Roman Republic. Talks about patria versus natio. So patria and natio have very similar meanings, but there's some nuance here. It says patria natio. Patria meant the res publica, or politic constitution, the laws, and the resulting way of life, and therefore also the culture. Natio meant the place of birth and all that was linked to the place, such as ethnic identity and language. So again, a little bit more of a the res publica, the republic is a cultural construct, and so it doesn't depend on your it's an identity that can be adopted. Then there's a kind of a funny exchange with when Viroli calls Bobbio a Hobbesian, and he doesn't deny it. I guess he's done some scholarly work on Hobbes, and so that puts him in the tradition of classical liberalism, and so you have a classical liberal and a Republican together. You have the principle of the rule of law over the rule of men. That goes back to Harrington and Machiavelli. Again, they define Viroli defines non-dominated liberty as the same as self-determination, and non-interference liberty as license. So meaning the absence of impediment. So I thought that was a helpful definition. Citizens of a republic must be intransigent, he says, not giving in, sacrificing their own interest for the idea that they believe in. And then they have a conversation about the need for rights and duties. Bobbio doesn't feel that there's such a need for duties coming out of the anti-fascist struggle. You have, because the fascists really emphasized duties over rights, and so there was kind of a reaction of his generation to have, to stress rights over duties. But Viroli, being the Republican that he is stresses that moderation of republicanism, that you need rights and duties. There's a big influence from Mazzini, I believe. So they talk about what duties you would include if you had like a declaration of duties, you have a declaration of rights. So duties would include respect for others, the common good, the importance of religion in republics. And I'm going to read this. This is a really good line. Machiavelli and de Tocqueville, two writers very far apart, came by a different route to the same conclusion, that republics have a particular need of religion, to provide the citizens with direction in their moral life and to instill in them a sense of duty that causes the laws to be observed and civil obligations to be fulfilled. So that's the importance of religion to a republic. He goes on to talk about religion, and I'm still a little confused on what he means. Because Viroli comes from a Machiavellian background, and so Machiavelli believed that you needed religion to have a good, stable republic, but he also was very critical of Christianity at the time, of the Catholic Church. But let's leave that for another time, and we'll go on to this whole section here, which is on charity versus social right. And bear with me, I'm going to read this whole page, but it is a really good explanation of what Mazzini was talking about. And I think it reflects also on Mazzini's idea of association. And so, and also with that, the idea of mutual aid. Okay, and so think of the mutual aid versus charity. But don't you think it is better, Viroli says, to have social rights guaranteed by laws rather than entrusting the care of the sick, the old, the weak, and children to some form of joint responsibility, to the charitable inclinations of individuals and associations? From a Republican point of view, social rights should not be confused with welfare, which creates lifelong protégés of the state, permits privileges, and does not encourage individuals to look after themselves. Nor should they be confused with public charity, and still less with private charity, which provides help as an act of goodwill on the part of the state. Public and private charity, however praiseworthy, is incompatible with civilized existence because it offends against the dignity of the recipient. If I need assistance because I am poor, ill, or alone, I would prefer that assistance to be the acknowledgement of my right as a citizen, rather than based on a decision of an individual in the name of Christ's love. It is not an offense to be ill or old, and although many people do not understand this, a republic is not a public limited company, but a form of communal living whose aim is the dignity of its citizens. This is why a republic has the duty to guarantee assistance not as an act of compassion, but as the acknowledgement of a right that derives from being a citizen. It therefore has to take on the burden of assisting its citizens without making the recipients feel they are a burden, and without handing over to private agencies duties for which it should be responsible. Mazzini's comment on public and private charity is still valid. Quote, Christian charity was more a means to improve one's soul than an awareness of a common aim to be achieved with God's will on this earth. It never went beyond charity. When misfortunes befell men of the new religion, it fed the hungry, it clothed the ragged, and it cared for the sick, but it did not think about how to remove the reasons for poverty and lack of clothing. End quote. Don't you think it preferable to receive assistance in the name of rights rather than of charity? Okay, so Mazzini was also very critical of the Catholic Church in his time, and he was very, but he was very spiritual, a religious person, but just not a, did not think that the Catholic Church was doing the right thing by Italy. Let's go on here. Duties. Okay. So then in chapter 7, he talks about personal. He's talking about the problems with republics. He says personal parties, and there he's really talking about Berlusconi and demagoguery. Someone who just speaks so that the people hear what they want to hear, whether it's good for them or not. Money in politics is a bad thing. And so he kind of sums it all up in the next chapter, chapter 8. He's talking about the demagogic oligarch. Okay, so someone who is rich, but also demagogue. So not really fighting for the interests of the oligarchy, but fighting for the not really the interest of the people, but the angry mob. Let's see. He talks about hidden powers. He's talking about monarchy versus the republic's what we call today sunshine laws. That's where you have to have open meetings, and people have you have to have records accessible to the public, and your most of the time your deliberations need to be accessible to the public, before the public at least. So then in the last chapter they talk about institutional reform, and ends with the discussion of on elites and how there aren't really any democratic elites, great figures in political parties that will help to lead the people to the common good. And this is all again in the context of anti-fascist struggle. And so, of course, at that time, there's also some interesting critique on communism here. So communism is, of course, was anti-fascist and helped to overthrow Mussolini. And so there's, they stress that in a republic, you do have to bring people together at pluribus unum against great evils like fascism. And I hope we can all come together to oppose great evils. Long live the Republic.